This is an interview of Stephen Werner. Mr. Werner was born on the 16th of March in 1948. Mr. Werner served in the Air Force during the Vietnam conflict. Mr. Werner also achieved the rank of an E5 Staff Sergeant. The date of this recording is November 20th, 2015 at Da Vinci Charter Academy in Davis, California. The interview is Zebulon Robinson, and present at the interview is Natalie Moe and William Zera. The interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. Now, starting with some biological details, where were you born in the U.S.?
I was born in Van Nuys, California.
Okay. What was your family like? What were your parents' occupations and how many siblings do you have? What was your family situation?
When I was born, it was in Southern California. Mom and Dad moved us to a place called Pollock Pines, Smith Flats, up in the Placerville area. So I literally grew up in Northern California. I have one younger brother. Mom and Dad had several businesses as I was growing up, and then both of them went to work for Aerojet. And my dad retired from Aerojet, and after 35, 36 years at Aerojet, Mom went on to go to work for American River College, and she retired from American River. I basically grew up in Fair Oaks. The house that I grew up in, Mom and Dad sold eventually, and they moved on. And we had fun. It was typical family growing up in the 50s and the 60s. We were Ozzie and Harriet. It was that kind of thing.
And what were you doing before entering the service?
I was going to school. I had graduated high school. I was playing ball and decided to go on to college. As I affectionately say, I went to school just to play sports. And I found out that I was in the middle of the draft. And I was never a student at all, and all I wanted to do was play ball, baseball, football, run track. And as I said, found out this as I went to college. Some of the guys got a little bit bigger than me, and my draft number was kind of low, so I decided I better enlist instead of being drafted. So after I took my placement test in Oakland. Went to the Navy recruiter, and I was in pretty good shape, as I said, after playing ball. And as I sat across from him, the Navy recruiter told me that I was not in good shape. I was not in good enough shape to be in the Navy. So that kind of upset me. So I walked around to the next door, and I went into the Air Force recruiter's office, and I enlisted in the Air Force, and within a few weeks I was on my way.
Okay, and what did you mean by having a low draft number?
Oh, a low draft number. At that time, the Army was drafting the people to go into the service, and the draft is where they would pull your name out of a hat or a number out of a hat. You were assigned a specific number, and as you went along, when you reach a certain age, it was 18, I believe, or 16 to 18, they would actually induct you into the Army. And at that time, most of the people that were in the Army went directly to the infantry or whatever, and directly went to Vietnam. So that's what a draft number is.
Okay, and when you say you had a low one, that means you were
I was on my way to going into the Army. Being a low number means you were on your way in. They started with 1 and then went to like 200 or 300, the numbers. And it was just for that particular year. They changed every year.
Do you have any other family members who served in the military?
Yeah, my brother also served in the Air Force. One of my sons also served in the Air Force. I have a cousin who served in the Army. My dad served in the Merchant Marines during World War II. My uncle served in the Army during World War II. That would be the immediate family.
Okay. Now, moving on from that into your earlier days of service, you did say why you chose the Air Force instead of the Navy, but were there any other influencing effects that made you join the Air Force as a Marine?
Well, I didn't. I was always pretty good with my hands, and you take a armed forces test, and they rate you in a certain percentile. On I think there was 4 areas: admin and mechanical. Anyway, there were several different areas, and I scored high enough in all areas that I could have my choice of careers I wanted to go into. And I liked working with my hands, working on cars at the time, and I thought being an aircraft mechanic would be a fun thing to do. So that's what I asked to be, and that's what they sent me to be.
All right, and just to get the full span, what was the total years that you served?
4 years,
Okay.
68 to 72.
Now, what was it like when you departed from the training camp, and what were the earlier days of training like for you?
Well, I can remember we went to Oakland, and everybody went to Oakland, and then we were dispersed out to different areas. My first stop was in Amarillo, Texas, where I spent 6 weeks going through basic training. Basic training is basically just that. You learn Air Force military courtesies, and you learn to march. You get your hair absolutely shaved off the top of your head, and you just learn military protocols, and they run you through some physical training, and you go through physical training. And after that, I got sent to Wichita Falls, Shepherd Air Force Base for 13 weeks, and I was trained as a aircraft mechanic, a turbo engine aircraft mechanic, basically a general mechanic. But I was trained as the overall knowledge of a turboprop aircraft. At that time, it was a 130 or a 131 or that sort of aircraft. From there, after I left Shepherd, went home on leave for 30 days, and then that was from Texas, went home to leave back to California, and then I was shipped back to North Carolina, Pope Air Force Base in Fayetteville, North Carolina. And at Pope Air Force Base, that's where I actually was in the Air Force. While at Pope, I was on C-130s, which is a cargo aircraft. We also were responsible for dropping paratroopers. You have to remember at the time, this is 68, 69. There's a lot of paratroopers going on, a lot of Army guys going over to Southeast Asia. And so we were actually dropping them out of the back of the aircraft. I worked my way up to being a crew chief. I earned my wings as being a enlisted crew member. I did a lot of flying when I was in North Carolina. I flew all over the United States, picking up aircraft parts or materials, dropping the Army in several exercises. At one time, we went temporary duty to Greenland. I went temporary duty to England. I was over in Germany for a while in Frankfurt at Rhein-Main Air Base. I went temporary duty there. Went temporary duty into Sweden. We even flew the corridor between East and West Germany, because at the time, West Germany, which was pro-American, was smack dab in the middle of East Germany, which was a communist country after World War II. And there was actually a corridor that you had to fly from Frankfurt to get into Berlin, into West Berlin, which was the American zone. And as you were flying along through this corridor, you would have MiG aircraft come alongside of you, Russian aircraft, and would actually, escort you in to West Berlin, and that was the only way you could get in there. Sometimes, depending on what was going on, we would then go into neutral companies such as Switzerland and Norway and that sort of thing, and we were not allowed to get off the aircraft in uniform. We would have to get off in civilian clothes because we were at war, and they wanted us not to display, our uniforms, even though we have a real big airplane out there with American insignias all over it. And so left Europe. did a lot more flying. Went to Alaska, went to the Philippines, temporary duty. And when I say temporary duty, what it is, you start in North Carolina at Pope, and if my plane was to go someplace, if there was a mission that the plane had to go on, I had the opportunity to actually fly on the plane. Now, the first 1 or 2 flights was really exciting, but after 15 or 20, it got really boring because you don't do anything. And believe it or not, flying can be really boring in a military aircraft because there's absolutely nothing to do unless it breaks, and then, panic sets in. From there, believe it or not, I volunteered to go to Vietnam. I was one of those that it was 1970, and it's right in the height of Vietnam, and I was rather a patriotic young person. And I was somewhat older than some of the other kids. I was either 20 or 21, so most of the other guys that were in the military at the time were either 18 or 19, so I was always considered an old man at 20 or 21. But I was rather patriotic, so I put in my papers and I volunteered to go to Southeast Asia. When it was accepted, I went to Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, and they cross-trained me from a big 4-engine turboprop transport to a small 2-engine, 2-seater Ford air control aircraft. It was called an OV-10 Bronco, and the OV-10 Bronco, basically what it did was it would, I'm sure you've seen movies or whatnot of airstrikes by the B-52s or airstrikes by fighters and whatnot. Well, the OV-10 would be the one who would actually target or mark the targets on the ground, and that would be called in by the Army or by the Marines on the ground for air support. And we would actually have rockets, and then we could actually support the ground troops on the ground. And we come in and we'd mark the areas, and B-52s would be dropping bombs, and the F-4s would be shooting rockets into the area. So we were in support. So I was trained on that, and again, in the wisdom of the military, I went home on leave here in Sacramento. I had 30 days leave, and instead of sending me out of Travis or someplace like this here on the West Coast to go to Southeast Asia, they sent me all the way back to New Jersey to catch a flight from New Jersey. First stop from New Jersey was Oakland. So I'm thinking to myself, well, there's 2 or 3 days it's absolutely wasted. So we hit Oakland. This is one of the aircraft that they sent us over to Southeast Asia on was, we called them a Stretch 8. It was like a big 707. They're huge aircraft, and there was nothing fancy about them. You had 300 or 400 GIs, 3 or 4 seats together, real closer than what these are now. And so we were flying 25, 26 hours to get to Southeast Asia. But fortunately, we go from like Oakland to Hawaii, Hawaii to the Philippines, and we finally probably start getting into Southeast Asia. And we're flying around as we were coming in. It's during the early morning, and all we could see was the pilot now is flying around in circles over Ben Hoa, which is outside of Saigon. Ben Hoa was the first base I went into, and he's flying around in circles, and all we can see is the base being hit by mortars, and right exactly where we're landing. You can see the landing strip below us, and Charlie was just laying mortars out and rockets down because they knew we were coming in. So there was a break. Either somebody went out and got rid of Charlie. Now Charlie is the VC, the Viet Cong. They either got rid of him, and I've never seen such an airplane make such maneuvers to get down. So he gets down, he lands, and he doesn't shut off the engine, and he says, get the hell out of here. So we're running off the plane. He literally turns around and just takes off again, he's got to pick up some other people to take him back to the United States, but he's got to get off the base. So that was my introduction to Southeast Asia, is a mortar attack at the base. Spent several weeks there at Benoit, and they then sent me up to Da Nang, which is up in the northern part of Southeast. Oh, I'm working again on these OV-10s, the forward air controllers. That's what they're called. They're called FACs, FACs. And our favorite term for us was, we're going to FAC it. So if you just understand that would be okay. But that was the term that we used. So I, again, volunteered. I says, I want to do something other than just working on airplanes in the middle of an airfield. So they sent me to Da Nang. They gave me another airplane. I was in and out of Da Nang, and I went from Da Nang, I went into Pleiku. Pleiku is up in the western portion of South Vietnam, up in the Central Highlands, right on the Cambodian-Thailand border, up in that area. And I spent a considerable time up in that area, and we flew support for a lot of missions up and down the Ho Chi Minh Trail, as far as making sure that Charlie and the North Vietnamese didn't infiltrate down to the south. Going back into Da Nang every once in a while, I was there for a while. I got hooked up with a bunch of guys who were actually working at an orphanage and a school in Da Nang, and it was an experience that I really enjoyed. We went in, and of course these kids were war orphans, literally war orphans, and we were teaching them how to speak English. I was getting ready for this. I was going through some of the stuff. I have a book that they actually filled out for me, and it's really brought back some memories as far as what was being taught in English. This would have been 1971, into 70, 71. I have feelings about that, because I know once that South Vietnam fell to the communists in 72, 73, or was it 75, whenever it was, I have a real feeling, a bad feeling, that the kids and the people that we worked with in the orphanage were either probably put into camps or were killed, because they were working very closely with the GIs. I mean, we were so close that we were invited to their homes for dinners. We would have big barbecues for the students and for the faculty of the orphanage and whatnot. So, that I just gotta. We always had to go in. We would leave Da Nang and we'd either go in by truck. There were several GIs. We'd either go in by truck or go in by Jeep. And here we are with, helmets on, big old flak jackets, 45 strapped to your hip with an M16 in your hand, and you drive into this compound, this orphanage, and the first thing we all did, every one of us, and we of course got in all kinds of trouble because we weren't supposed to do it, but we took the helmet off, we took the flak jacket off, we took our gun belts off and put the M16s away, because we figured, what we're here, we're projecting what the Americans are really like. And as I said, we were 20, 21-year-old, 18-year-old kids, and we weren't much older than the people that we were teaching English to. So I did that for a while. Went back up to Pleiku and went through several, well, not several, but two of my planes were actually shot down, and going out and trying to recover the plane that was shot down, recover some of the body parts and whatnot of the pilots. There's usually two of them, or if they didn't get out, most of them ejected. I do know that at least one of the pilots that I worked with was taken as a POW and spent several years in Hanoi as a POW. usually what was in the aircraft, there was there was our pilot, who was an American Air Force officer, and behind him we call what was an observer, and the observer would be in direct communication with the guys on the ground, be it Army, be it the Navy, be it the Marines and whatnot. And it was interesting. We being the Air Force would fly with flight suits on. We'd have patches on. We would have insignias on. We would have names on. And well, these guys, because believe it or not only were they Army, but they were also CIA. We had a huge contingency of CIA in and around Da Nang and Pleiku. They were there. I don't know if you ever heard about it, but Air America was an adage that was used for the Air Force of the CIA, and it's true. And they were none of the spies, and they looked like James Bond. They all looked like me, old and fat, but they weren't, svelte and everything like a James Bond. But anyway, the guys in the back seat were either CIA or they were Army, but they would be completely void of any insignias on their uniforms. They would wear a flight suit, because we all wore flight suits. But it was interesting, they always wore gold. They had lots and lots of gold, either chains or on their arms or stuffed in their pockets. And they had local money. Well, they had greenbacks, which when you're in country of Southeast Asia, you're not allowed greenback dollars. It's because it can be black marketed, but these guys did. And the reason that they had is if they were shot down, they literally could bargain their way out and not being taken prisoner by the North or the North Vietnamese or the Viet Cong. They would literally buy their way out and get back out of the jungle. And I personally know of at least two instances like that the backseater did actually work his way through. So that basically in a nutshell what we did. Left Southeast Asia, Vietnam in April of '71, and I came back to Travis. And at Travis, they retrained me into 141s and C5s from a turboprop. The difference being is a turboprop is a plane that has a big prop, and they retrained me into multi-engine jets, and the C5s and 141s. It's the big jet transports that you see flying around now. So they retrained me in that. I went from being a crew chief to going into what is called field maintenance. Field maintenance basically is you're just one of a bunch of guys, and if a plane broke down or it had to have routine maintenance, we'd all load up into a truck, and they would take us out to an airplane, and we would go out and we would do the required maintenance on it. So that's my 4 years basically in a nutshell.
All right. In that 4 years, do you have any other stories besides the orphanage story that you'd like to share with us that you really feel strongly about?
Most of them are just not that I can think of. The orphanage, obviously means a lot to me. The other things is as I said, I was preparing to come visit with you folks. I was looking through things, and broken airplanes that brought back why the particular airplane was broken, and bullet holes all over the place. And again, we're 19, 20, 21 years old, and we're invincible. We're literally invincible. We had no idea what we did actually, but we could care less. It was funny that when you first go in, for example, I was telling you the story about flying around, going into Benoit the first night that we're going in, and it's being mortared and shelled. For the first week, whenever the sirens would go off and we were being mortared or whatnot, I ran like hell getting into the bunkers and the revetments. Now, these are areas that were either dug underground or that were built up by sandbags that protected you from incoming mortar rounds or whatever, or even what is called sapper charges. We would have, that'd be interesting. We would have, we had a lot of Vietnamese nationals working on the bases. We would actually pay them. They would work for, we would have hooches or whatever that we would live in. A hooch is kind of a Quonset hut or type of thing, or a tent or something like that. And we would interview and hire what we called mamasans, and they would come in and do our laundry. They would clean out the barracks or the hooches and whatnot. At that time, I was an NC, non-commissioned officer, so we had our own bar that we had, and we would hire some of the better-looking girls, of course, to come in and be the bar girls for us. Some of the interesting things is either the girls or the girls' fathers or brothers or whatnot. Every once in a while, we would see them on the perimeter or walking towards us or walking around inside the base, and you could see them pacing off. And all of a sudden that night, it was amazing how accurate some of the hits from the mortars were and from the rockets. And what they were doing is they were pacing off distances. So we were infiltrated by the North, by the VC, continuously as far as getting the rounds to hit. We'd have sapper charges. A sapper charge is a satchel type of thing full of explosive, and they would just pull the pin and they'd run and they'd just throw it. Now, as I was telling you, when I first got there, I was no hero. So I would run like mad into the shelter just to protect myself. Well, that lasted about a week or two until I figured out that's where they're going to throw these satchels and they're going to throw them in there. And not only that, but you get in there and you take a round outside of these protected areas and it would just rattle the hell out of your head. And I just wouldn't have it. So I just have my flak jacket and my helmet, and I would just be asleep, and I just pulled over the top of my head because I knew, at 21 years old, I was invincible. I wasn't going to be hurt. Well, you get to the end of your tour, which a couple of weeks before what they call being short. Being short means you're a short timer. A short timer is one of those guys that only has a short amount of time in country. And you started also running to the revetment again and trying to protect yourself. So you go from one extreme to the other, but there was a great amount of time in the middle where you thought you were invincible. That's about it.
Okay. Are there any friendships that you had made during your service? Yeah,
made several. And it's funny, after a period of time, I've kind of went away from them. I don't see them hardly anymore. It was really interesting. When I was in high school, I had a very, very good friend of mine, Bob Simmons. He and I were very, very close. And we were going to go in the Marines together. And so I says, well, at that time, you go in as a buddy partner, so you could go through the Marines together. You do everything you want together. So I says, not a problem. I'll do that. Well, by the time he was walking up the plane to go at San Francisco to go to basic training down in San Diego, I was waving at him through the window. I decided I wasn't going to be a Marine. And like I was told you at the beginning, I figured out that if I'm not going to be drafted to be in the Army, why would I volunteer to be a Marine? So when I got to Da Nang, as I said, I was trained as an aircraft mechanic on a big 130. I get to Da Nang, and I see this guy walking towards me in a Marine uniform, and if isn't my buddy Bob Simmons. And I'll be damned if he isn't doing exactly the same job that I was doing, but as a Marine. And it was just so interesting that, how it paralleled everything. He came back. He lives here also. Came back to Sacramento. He came back and became a VA nurse. Retired as a VA nurse. He and his wife and his daughters own a cattle ranch, a small cattle ranch. I went on and got into retail. Got married. When I got out of the service, I was married with a kid, so I knew I had to get a job instead of staying in the service. And then I went to work for the police department and retired from the police department. And now we're, kind of back together. He and I are kind of back together, where we're kind of communicating with each other. We're both on social media a lot, on military and of course me with the police department. A lot of information that together. So that was kind of cool.
Okay.
That's about the only one that I remember that I was stationed with.
All right, and did you say there were a few other ones?
No. Well, there were, but we just kind of, after 50, 60 years, you just kind of, a lot of them die off and that sort of thing.
Okay, and I'm sorry if this is kind of a touchy subject, but this is something that I was personally interested in, you said earlier. Whatever happened to the POW in Hanoi?
The best, he was released. He did make it back. I lost touch with him after I left, because he probably didn't get released until the mid-'70s and whenever the POW release was. So it was several years that he spent, and I just kind of lose track of him. But I just remember him going down, and it's just an awful feeling when something like that happens, because you know what's going to happen.
Okay, now, even though you're a mechanic, how close were you to the use of napalm or Agent Orange?
Napalm was usually used on my plane was as I said, was the ones that would spot for the drop of napalm. So being on a large base like in Da Nang, it was a huge base, so we would have a lot of the planes rolling up that were loaded with napalm and Agent Orange. As it turned out, after all the years, I have been diagnosed with Agent Orange. After it's not a real severe case of it, but the VA has determined that I have some disabilities because of Agent Orange. Nothing that you can tell.
How do you personally feel about its use? Do you think it should have been used, or?
Agent Orange?
Yes.
It saved lives. I have no problem whatsoever. If it hadn't have been used, if you could just, I don't know how to explain it. Some of these areas, the areas of Southeast Asia are very dense, a lot of trees and brushes and stuff. And you have to move the vegetation away. It's just too bad that it was just an awful thing. But I personally don't have any qualms about it being used. It probably could have been used a little bit differently. But if you just saw the way it was called, I believe the operation was called Ranch Hands, and how indiscriminately it was used. It was just sprayed everywhere. And it just defoliated the whole area.
All right, and besides yourself, do you know anyone else who was exposed to Agent Orange?
Oh, yeah. I belong to a veterans club. I live in an over 55 community up in North Natomas. And we have a veterans club, and it's relatively small, and we're getting more and more people. But there's 2 or 3 gentlemen that have had some real problems because of Agent Orange and PTSD. I was in the Air Force. We were lovers, not fighters, that sort of thing. I mean, I learned how to shoot a rifle and that sort of an M16. One of the things that I do remember is one time, we were under attack, and they handed out M16s to everybody, and they give them to the Air Force dudes, and we're going, what's this? Not really. But they would put us on what was called the green line. Now, the green line was just that, green troops, because they knew we would just go through rounds and magazines, one right after the other, and shoot indiscriminately, just anything we could shoot at, just because it was moving. And behind us was the more experienced Army guys that were a little bit better equipped with an attack that was going on. This one attack that I remember, it happened over a couple of days, and we could hear the night before the attack where we could smell marijuana. I mean, there's an obvious aroma to marijuana, so we could smell it. And after the attack, apparently what they were doing is they were getting high and they were smoking it so they would get the guts for an attack. We got out there and we started kicking over dead bodies and whatnot, and we noticed that a lot of these guys had wires and their pressure points tied off. And basically what it was is if they were shot, they wouldn't bleed out. We were essentially shooting at dead people, because as you shoot somebody, typically you hit them, you lose blood, and that's it. But what we found out, that they were taking multiple gunshot wounds and whatnot, and they weren't bleeding out quite quickly enough, and so they were still advancing at us. But that was the type of enemy that we were going up against.
All right, and still going with the entire theme of how it was like in the Army, what about recreation time? Like, how much did you have, and what was it like?
In the States, we had a lot. When I was going back to North Carolina, I participated in, I was on the Air Force track team for a while, inter-service track team for a while, and I got to travel around and compete against the Navy and the Marines and the Army at different places. I threw the shot and the discus. We played a lot of baseball or softball, played a lot of football. Once we got to Southeast Asia, it was anything that we could do. I mean, there was still a lot of stuff going on. Not all time was taken up by working. There was a lot of downtime. You get very, very bored, and there was a lot of guys who did a lot of smoking dope and doing cocaine and that sort of thing. And it was nothing more than boredom. It was just absolute boredom, if you can call that recreation.
All right. And then, besides, of course, the, well, never mind. What experiences or memories did you have with the Vietnamese, like good relations or bad relations, such as?
When you fight a war, you hate your enemy. You have to hate your enemy. Now, when I say hate, that it's a little bit different than hating a group of people. You just hate that son of a bitch that's over there trying to kill you, basically. You don't know who he is, and you don't know what he is, and you may not treat him very well because you're in the fog of war. Things just happen because they happen. You see somebody get blown up. You see somebody shot. In our case, we knew our pilots were getting shot at and crashing and whatnot. So the enemy part of it, I harbor no disrespect or ill feelings whatsoever to the Vietnamese whatsoever. None whatsoever. I have no hatred to them whatsoever. But as I said, as you're in war, you have to, and I don't know if hate is the proper term, but you got to dislike them a lot, because you got to kill them. I mean, that's your job. I said, but I did the other side, and I think that's why I went and worked at the orphanage and worked at the teaching English, because I wanted that other side of it. I wanted to show these people that, you know, all Americans aren't assholes, basically. And a lot of them, you know, there was a lot of stuff that went on during Vietnam that probably shouldn't have gone on. Burning of villages and indiscriminate killings and that sort of thing. It shouldn't have happened. But again, you have to realize you're at war. And once, if you've never understood war and you've never been subjected to something like that, you just kind of, it's just something that you go. And again, I was in the Air Force, so I didn't have the real experiences that the Army guys had and the Marines had, that were in the bush months at a time, and all they are is being shot at. So my experience was a little bit tempered because I didn't have quite the experiences that they had.
All right. Now. You mentioned the burning of villages. Were there other strategies or tactics that you believe shouldn't have been used during the Vietnam War?
Not off the top of my head. I mean, as I said, you're in the middle of an armed conflict. You do things that you have to do. That's like the poor guys now. I mean, I don't know how I would feel with with what they have to go through now. It's just something that is totally unrealistic to me. I wouldn't want to play this. I wouldn't want to play their war. Let's put it that way. Going on now.
All right. But on the same subject, did you hear any stories from people that were stationed on the ground about such things?
I was there when My Lai happened. I did write an editorial. If you don't remember My Lai, it was a village that was massacred, basically. There were extenuating circumstances from the GI's point of view. You hear about them, but you just you dismiss them. You don't think about them. Just off the top of my head, no. I know that some of our pilots would have great fun blowing up animals. You know, that's not funny probably, but oxen, for example. At one time, a ox was considered a military target only because it carried rockets, it carried ammunition, it carried supplies for the other side. So at one time, they were open game for pilots to just blow off the earth. But again, it's like a truck. It's what the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong used to transport goods from one point to the other. And the goods happened to be ammunition and rockets and mortars that they were shooting at us.
Were there any other tactics that you used to deter tactics that the North Vietnamese used, such as the one with the oxen?
Well, the interesting thing, we used a lot of flashlight batteries because we would work at night a lot of times. And at one time, we would just take the C-cell batteries, and we'd just throw them away. Literally, just throw them away. After they were gone, we couldn't use them. Hey, we're Americans, so if it dims a little bit, we can replace it with new ones. What we were finding out was the Viet Cong were using the thrown away batteries, and that's what they were discharging their rockets with on either side. They took just that much, very little electricity and that's how the rockets were ignited off to come into the bases. So what we had to end up like breaking down the batteries, literally breaking them down so they couldn't be used anymore.
Any other tactics? Or-
Nah.
Okay. What was one of your favorite stories when you were working on planes during your service?
Oh, I loved to fly. I really, really missed it. I especially when when I first got in the service, I was very, very fortunate to visit, maybe 20, 30 states, several countries, as I said, and Europe and Asia and whatnot. I just loved to fly.
Do you have any other experiences with traveling abroad because of the Army? Like, just, even if it's recreational?
No.
Moving on to the subject of coming home, where were you when the war ended?
I was in California. I had just I separated from the Air Force in '72, and so I was in California. I'm in this area actually.
Sorry, I forgot it was 72. When you came home, how were you received in 72?
Well, actually, when I came home in 1970, we left. The story I was telling you about flying in circles because we were landing. Well, I was leaving out of Da Nang on a same kind of airplane, big commercial airplane, and we're all in Da Nang airport ready to load up onto the plane. And I'll be damned if Da Nang didn't come under a mortar attack. Just 12 months earlier, there was a mortar attack in the south part of the country as we were coming in. Well, now they were going to get me one way or the other, I guess. But anyway, we literally the plane came in, and he literally almost stopped. That we just stopped long enough that we literally could run onto the plane. Now we're still all in fatigues. Now fatigues are the uniform of the day. The wonderful green uniforms that you wear. So we take off, and we're going on our way back to California, and we were supposed to go into LAX. I think it was to actually. Where we were supposed to come into the United States. No, it was Hawaii. We went into Hawaii, did our stuff because Hawaii was a state. Then we got coming into L.A. Well, it was fogged in, and I had called my parents. I wasn't married at the time, and so I called my parents. I'm coming home. I'll be coming into L.A. From L.A. I'll be going to Sacramento. So can you pick me up? Yada yada yada. Well, long story short, we get in, it's fogged in Southern California. We finally end up in, I forget, San Bernardino. I forgot where it was, but someplace way out in the middle of nowhere. We couldn't change our uniforms because they wanted us to change our uniforms out of a uniform into civvies. Because if you remember at that time, there was a lot of crap going on as far as how we were received. And unfortunately, I was one of those that as soon as I ended up in the airport, I was spat upon and called a baby killer. And, it was just one of those experiences that you don't like to go through. But it was funny. I called my parents several times, the planes coming in, the planes leaving, I'll be here, be there. I get on the phone to the operator, and she says, "Welcome home, GI." After going through all the other crap. So yeah, coming home sometimes was not the easiest. I really support our vets now, and because of that, it was a tough experience, and I don't want any other GI to go through that.
While you were in service, did you hear much about the conflict or controversy going on in the States?
Oh yeah. We had daily paper, we had radio, we actually had TV, Armed Forces Radio, Armed Forces TV. They let us know. I mean, it was well known of what was going on in the States. I can remember at the time I was bitter about the student revolts and whatnot, but I got over that too.
All right, what about the more prevalent historical events such as the Kent shooting?
Well, that was kind of in before I was going. It happened. I look back on it and think that it was a tragedy. Like all events such as that, it's just a tragedy that it happened. There's a lot of crap that shouldn't have happened, and it did.
Coming back, was it difficult to readjust back into society, well, to civilian life after being in service?
As I said, when I got out of the service and I got married, had a kid. Fortunately, I had a good family that supported me. It took a little time to get back to what I was doing, but I had a lot of support, so it wasn't bad.
Moving on to some reflections. How did wartime experiences affect your life as a whole?
I grew up real quick. I became an adult real fast. As I said, I was 19, 20, 21 years old, and you become an adult real fast. I look back on it. As I said, being a veteran and also retired from the police department, I support both since they're so similar. The police department and the vets, they're so similar. I support them a lot and give them as much support as I can.
All right, and being in the military service, did you learn any life lessons, and if so, what were they?
Oh, again, just growing up, a lot of discipline that I used throughout my life. I'm 67 now, so I don't have to work anymore, thank God. But, being punctual, silly things, just silly things. Being on time. If you're given a job, just complete the job. Don't bitch and complain about stuff. And you can bitch and complain, but at least get what you have to get done and get on with your life.
Any other important things you
Nah.
say?
No.
Okay. Questions? Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure. Thank you.